Good evening. I'm Mary Denise Simmons, and it's always a pleasure to be here to participate and to support in this annual commemoration. I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening for Cambridge's annual Holocaust Commemoration. Every year, so many people devote their time, energy to ensuring that Cambridge marks this occasion with the appropriate tone, with solidarity with those whose lives have been touched and impacted by this event, and with a sense of optimism for a better tomorrow through our shared strength. I want to particularly thank Corr, who's been doing this for a number of years. Thank you so much for keeping this tradition going. Rabbi Liza Stern, who I had the great pleasure of participating in a Seder. It was a touching, very touching experience. I hope she'll invite me again. Our city manager, who you'll hear from later, Mr. Louis Di Pasquale. But I also want to just pause to acknowledge my colleagues from public life that have come to join us this evening. Kathleen Kelly from the school committee, Fred Fantini from the school committee, Sam Seidel, a former colleague who comes every year, and State Representative Mike Conley. I'm so pleased that they're here as well to join us in this commemoration. Philosopher George Santayana once stated, "Those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it." For decades following the Second World War, whenever the topic of the Holocaust was mentioned, it would be done in hushed, solemn, deep tones, with people forever adding, "We must never forget." My good friend Red Mitchell, who was a World War II veteran, as he was coming over here, was sharing with me his time when he was there in Germany and what he experienced and how he was always changed as a soldier, but as a black man, because he also had to remember that African Americans were tortured as a part of the Holocaust. We must never forget. The sentiment is unmistakable. We must never forget just how brutal, destructive, offensive, evil, all that took place in the 1930s and the 1940s against Jews, homosexuals, those with mental illness, those with disabilities, those who promoted political dissidents. They were horrific, nightmarish acts. And in the generation since, it's become harder to truly appreciate the magnitude of what happened. We can read about it. We can view grainy old footage of what transpired. But as we move closer to the day when the last living links to that era are gone, we risk losing the visceral, terrifying sense of the impact of this horrific event. We run the risk of sanitizing our history. And as much as we might want to wish to banish our painful collected memories in the dustbin of history, it is important that we continually force ourselves to remember. It is important that we recall exactly what took place during the Holocaust. The lives that were lost and transformed, lest we allow ourselves to start going down that same dark path. Unfortunately, the nationalism, the scapegoating, the persecuting, the othering, and this ethnic cleansing in Germany in the 1930s and 40s are symptoms that have never truly gone away. Those ugly strands of nationalism and groupthink that have visited other countries like a virus, and they have found pockets where they can hide and nestle away and ready to flare back to life in an instant. We need not to look very far. Groups like ISIS, who are fighting with a barbaric fanaticism, and skewed ideological purity, to see this deplorable, destructive behavior play out in the modern era, and it is no less sickening. Even the United States has not been immune to these destructive elements, and it is unfortunate, it is unsettling reality that these anti-Semitic incidents have been sharply on the rise in our country over just the past few months. Synagogues have been targeted with swastikas painted on the walls. Headstones in Jewish cemeteries have been toppled, and bomb threats have been called into community centers across the country. And that's what makes these observances, this observance tonight, all the more critical. For they help us to reconnect to one another and recommit to the learning of our history, and most importantly, to passing it on. In nearly 30 years, then and city councilor, former mayor, and state representative, and my hero, Alice Wolf, launched the Cambridge Holocaust Commemoration in 1989, and I truly want to thank her for doing that. Our planet has seen too many wars, too much suffering, and too much indifference. With each passing year, the unconscionable events of the Holocaust recede further into history. Yet the lessons of that era are ever so important. One of those lessons, of course, is actually something quite positive. For all the horror, the tragedy that took place so many decades ago, we saw numerous examples of resiliency of the human spirit. A living example of that resiliency is tonight's keynote speaker, Mr. Aaron Greenfield. Mr. Greenfield knows firsthand of the horrors of the Holocaust. Having survived 9 different concentration camps, he can speak firsthand to what happens to a society that seeks to scapegoat people when it seeks to delegitimate and deny the very humanity of a group of people. But he can also speak of the spirit of perseverance. And that is an important takeaway we must hold on from this chapter in history. No matter how dark the skyline, no matter how loud the drums of war, and how hopeless events may seem, we must never forget that there is goodness, decency, tenacity within each of us that we always, always must let shine through and ultimately overtake the darkness. So we come together each year to honor those who we have lost in an hour of darkness and to recommit ourselves again and again and again to learning the lessons of history and vowing and that we will commit to work together toward a brighter future. So it is my pleasure to be here and to remind us all that we must never forget.
Thank you, Mayor Simmons, and amen to all that you said. The Holocaust does not go away. It lies in wait, a subterranean beast waiting to pry off of us our hope and happiness. A story, an accent, a photograph, a date, a sound, a name, a number on an old arm, an obituary, any seemingly incidental moment or thing can trigger a descent into darkness and disbelief and despair and guilt. It's too much. It's too much. And we're tempted, if only it had never happened, if only we and the world could somehow make that piece of history just disappear. If only we could forget. The Holocaust does not go away. And I'm certain that many of you, like me, saw an obituary in this past Monday's New York Times, an obituary of Shobha Nehru, who died last week at her home in the Himalayan foothills at the age of 108. She had been married to B.K. Nehru, who was an Indian dignitary from a distinguished Kashmiri family. She was cousin by marriage to India's first prime minister. She was related as well to the Gandhis by marriage. Indira Gandhi was a close friend of hers. Her husband had been at one time the ambassador to Washington, D.C., and in the Times there was a picture of Shobha Nehru sitting with President John F. Kennedy in 1962. So why do I mention her here? I mention her because she actually was a Holocaust survivor. She was born in Hungary. She was born to a prosperous, assimilated Jewish family by the name of Friedman. Actually, the family was so assimilated that they had been permitted to change the name Friedman to von Forbach until the anti-Semitism, which rose in Hungary, forced the von Forbachs to change their name back to Friedman. Shobha's nickname all her life was Fori, a reminder of that time in Hungary when life was sweet with privilege. Summers in the country cottage, fine education, fine clothes. And when her world started to collapse, quotas were set for Jews at universities. And she, coming from such a privileged family, was sent abroad to the London School of Economics. There she met her future husband. So she put on a sari, she married Nehru, and she didn't look back. It was as if her earlier life and identity had simply disappeared. Until she returned to Hungary after the war. She returned for the first time in 1949 with her 3 sons who had never seen her dressed in anything but a sari. And there, the truth of the devastation lay in wait. The stories, the empty spaces where once a relative or a friend or a building had been. She could not, in fact, simply forget. Fori returned to India and resumed her life as the wife of a high-level dignitary, but she also returned as a Jew. She became active in social justice issues in her adopted homeland, and when she was 90 years old, she asked her friend, historian Martin Gilbert, to teach her about her people. In response to that request, he wrote a book that perhaps some of you are familiar with, called The Story of the Jewish People, Letters to My Auntie Fori. No longer tempted to make her past disappear, Fori had become a memory carrier. I have a feeling of guilt, she said. I wasn't there. I was safe. And this guilt feeling is always with me. Why should I not have suffered? For survivors, for the children of survivors, and for all of us, that impossible question haunts us. We who bang our heads and our hearts against the question, why them, are left with the corollary, why not me? Why did my mother survive? Why, when that German officer boarded the bus and demanded to see the papers she, of course, did not have, why did the German stranger sitting next to her berate her for leaving her papers at home and tell the officer that she was his wife? Why? Why did my father survive? Why, when the Gestapo burst into the apartment and rounded everyone up, did he happen to be at a friend's house? Why him and not her? Why her and not him? Why Fori and not her sister? Why me and not them? The question hangs in the air. It's unanswerable. It's intolerable. Time passes. Survivors die of old age. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren regard the Holocaust as ancient history, and we are tempted, if only it had never happened, if only the world could make it disappear, if only we could forget. But the Holocaust does not go away. We, the survivors, and all of us are survivors in some way. We who live here and now, on the other side of history's greatest nightmare, we gather tonight with our memories, with our losses, and with our guilt. And we declare that to remember is our sacred task, that the capacity to remember is essential if we are ever able to steer this world with a moral compass. This night, we honor those who died and those who did not, as we recommit ourselves to the work of healing our world. We're glad you're here.
Thank you. My name is Louis DiPasquale. I'm the Cambridge City Manager. It has been more than 70 years since the end of World War II and since the Holocaust ended. It is important for us to remember where we have come from and the challenges we have faced. People from all walks of life and backgrounds sacrificed, struggled, and survived. We are here because of them. It is so important that we come together to remember the Holocaust each year. As far as we know, this commemoration is unique because it remembers all the people who suffered and died in the Holocaust. It brings together survivors and their descendants with people from all parts of our community. It is powerful because each year we hear personal stories directly from a survivor of the Holocaust. We hear firsthand about what people lost and what people had to do to survive. For 28 years, the City of Cambridge has organized this commemoration, and for 28 years, Temple Beth Shalom has hosted us. I want to thank Aaron Greenfield, our speaker this evening, and Temple Beth Shalom for all their help and support. I also want to thank and recognize some city people for their participation and support. I want to start first with, of course, the Mayor of the City of Cambridge, Denise Simmons. I want to recognize former Mayor and State Representative Alice Wolf, who has been part of this commemoration since it began. City of Cambridge Employees Committee on Diversity for helping us tonight. For Valerie Buellin from the City Law Office Department for her help with this event each year. And finally, Brian Corr from the Cambridge Peace Commission for organizing this commemoration for the last 10 years. Thank you.
Good evening. So I am Brian Corr. I have, as the city manager just said, had the incredible privilege of being able to organize this event the last many years. It was the first thing I was asked to do on my first day at the city 9 years ago, and it's been an incredible honor to do this again year after year. My task here tonight is primarily to introduce our speaker and then to bring him up and sit with him, and he'll mostly talk. We might have a little discussion. But every survivor is special, but I have to say I'm very gratified this year because I'll just say every year one of the things I have to do to start the process is to find someone who can speak about their experience in the Holocaust so they can share their personal story with us so we can become witnesses, as it were, to what happened. And I first learned of Mr. Aaron Greenfield, maybe as some of you did, by reading the Boston Globe. Yvonne Abraham did a wonderful piece about Mr. Greenfield. And being one of those relatively internet-savvy people, I tracked down his phone number, spoke to his wife, Martha. Actually, at first I left a message, and then she called me back. But we then arranged for a time for me to come out to Norwood, where they live. And when I met the man that you're about to meet tonight, the first thing that happened, because I went down to the shop in Norwood, was he did what he does every weekday at the age of 90. He pulled out his keys, he opened the front door to his shop down in Norwood Center. He flipped over the sign that said open, turned on the light. The people who were lined up came into the store. They were waiting to buy things. He got everything set, and his wife Martha came in and took care of the customers. He took me across the street and bought me a cup of coffee. And we sat down, and this gentleman is unassuming, he's thoughtful. He's someone whose life has certainly had more than its share of hardship and difficulty, both in Poland, where he was born, and in this country, in Boston. But that did not change his inherent ability to be human, to be caring, to have a family, to run a business. And so I won't go into lots of details about his story. There's a biography in the program, and you'll hear from Mr. Greenfield tonight. But I do want to share one small piece of what Yvonne Abraham wrote in the Boston Globe. In 1937, he lived with his parents and 8 brothers and sisters in Krakow, Poland. People there, as everywhere, were suffering, struggling with unemployment and declining industry. Adolf Hitler gave the Greenfields' neighbors someone to blame for their misery. No facts could dissuade them. Truth was whatever the charismatic leader said it was. Even all these years later, it is hard for him to contemplate. And again, this is from the Boston Globe piece. He can barely sleep at night. The night before, he meets with a reporter, gives a presentation, pays at a middle school. But as long as this small, scrappy man has breath, he has to keep talking about it. So tonight, he's here to keep talking about it. And I ask each of you to listen very carefully. And as you listen, keep in mind what Rabbi Stern said, that perhaps any number of a dozen things that had gone slightly differently, and we wouldn't be here in Mr. Greenfield's presence tonight to hear his story. So please listen very carefully and give your full attention as we hear from Mr. Aaron Greenfield, survivor. So please come up, make a little space for us.
Everybody can hear me. My wife always complains that I speak too quietly. You know. That's why she does all the yelling. Anyway, my name is Aaron Greenfield. Sit down. I was born in Dukla, Poland, and I lived most of my life in Krakow, which is not too far from the German border, about 20 kilometers. As a matter of fact, my parents spoke German 100% because they were born under the Austrian-Hungary Empire, so they had the privilege of getting an education which most Jews in Poland or Russia did not. So, but they were very religious and very orthodox. And I come from 9 children, and basically, I could say now that my sister was still around until about 8 years ago. She passed away. She was also in a concentration camp. So she told me more about the family, my family, than I really knew because I was too young. The war broke out. I was 11, just became 13. I was supposed to be bar mitzvah, and so I went to our temple, which was already burned down, not by the Germans, but by the collaborators, that Germany promised them to give them a fantastic life as long as they go out and kill Jews. The town was basically Catholic. Some people were Protestant, but very few. I went to school basically in a Catholic school because there were about 200 Jewish families in that town, about 8,000 non-Jews. So even if I wasn't Jewish, I would be a problem because, I meant even if I wasn't religious, just being Jewish with the name, and I don't stand up when they do the prayers for Jesus Christ and all that, so right away you become a victim. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that, that's not important. Important was that in 1937, people were not informed, and this is what I'm trying to say, people should read both sides of the newspaper, not not the front page and the back page, but also in the middle, to find out what's going on. Hitler was preparing since 1933. Graffiti was all over about Jews. And Jews in German they said, Juden sind unser Unglück. Jews are our misfortune. We have to get rid of them. Every place I went, even without Hitler coming into our country, to Poland, I already suffered. I hated school so much because being bullied all the time. And the same people were just nice people only 2-3 years ago. So it just goes to show, if you listen to one side of the story, you're going to be exactly what they are. That's what Hitler wanted. That's what many politicians do here too. They get one against the other, so they can be re-elected sometimes. No, but anyway, that's beside it. Anyway, in 1939, I became bar mitzvah, so I went to my temple where, as I said, it was already burned down. There were no people there. A couple of old men with beard. One was a rabbi. They listened to it and they said, did a good job. 2 people instead of a bar mitzvah of 100 like they have over here. Because times were very bad. You had to run for your life when you came out into the street because they saw you coming, you're a Jew, and this was already before Hitler marched in. We were so close to the German border that in the 1st of September, Hitler was already in my town. We escaped trying to avoid it, and then we had to come back, and they were already there waiting for us. I'm going to go to the next item just to give you an idea what happened. My father went out to get some bread, and about 5 days into the war, and he had some kind of still some money, and could still get some bread, and he had a beard, and he spoke German 100%. He could anyway. On the way back, he had his bread in his hand. A couple of Nazis, Germans, whatever, soldiers, grabbed a hold of him. He had a beard. They called a lot of people over to see what we do to a Jew. They cut his beard off in front, beat him up. He came home with a swollen eye, a black eye. The lips were full of blood and so forth. Anyway. I'm going to go to the next thing, the horror that we went through just the first few days into the war. 3 weeks later, or 2 o'clock in the morning, some Germans got drunk. They were occupied already, they occupied Poland, they occupied my town, and they kept going all the way to Warsaw and all that. Some drunken soldiers came in 2 o'clock in the morning in our house, 9 children, and they said, everybody out of bed, line up. We didn't know what's going to happen. My little sister was only about 4 years old, the youngest one. My oldest brother was about 20. I was at that time 13. I just became 13. My mother was, the usual in the 40s. And they said, you, don't speak unless I talk to you. And he hit my brother and my father in the wrist to beat him up right there. The kids are screaming. It's an awful situation. We went back to bed. We already had half rations. The Poles, the people in Poland, the Polish people were getting a full ration of bread. We already get half ration. Not too much longer, we were still living in our own house. We decided 4 o'clock in the morning, we got up in the middle of the winter, the same year, probably was already 1940 or maybe the end of 1939, I don't remember exactly. I went with them, myself and my 2 brothers. They were much taller than I was. I never grew taller because I didn't have much food, because I was very under the Germans anyway. So we went to a farm we had a customer, she used to buy material from my mother, because they lost their businesses, so they sold the stuff to the house on payments like. And she was a very nice woman, a farm woman, a Polish woman. She knew us very well. And we bought milk from the woman in big cans. We carried it, and we went through the woods so the Germans wouldn't see us, because we had no right to get out except 2 hours a day. In the morning 1 hour, and in the evening 1 hour, and nighttime 1 hour. For shopping, and otherwise you go to work under their supervision and so forth. We got caught. Somebody must have saw us and probably squealed or something. They took us to a place where the Germans were having fun making exercises, like a club or whatever. And we waited, they kept us there until 9 o'clock in the morning. When people come in, they're already not sleeping, told everybody in town, come on, see what we're going to do to those people. If any of you do the same thing, not just Jews or others too, the same thing will happen to you. They told my brothers to take the shirt off, and they had whips like you would a lion with it. And they started to beat them half an hour straight, told them to do exercises while they were doing it. And people, women, children watching and everything else. And they didn't hit me, they didn't beat me, and I was lucky because the woman, there was a German there among them that had a girlfriend, and she was a neighbor of ours. She knew our family, she was a good friend. She said, leave that little kid alone, he's so small. And so I didn't get, but it made me watch. A half an hour straight, I kept beating him. We took them home, and they went home hardly, and they were in bed for about 2 weeks, black and blue completely. Not much further down the line, about 6 months later or 8 months later, they already wound up in a work camp. It wasn't concentration camp. It was a little bit better in the beginning. We didn't get the stripes, but you did get some food and some work. And the more they had gone to, the more they go into the war, they started to build concentration camps, not much. Anyway, my 3 brothers wound up in a camp. At that time, we still got postcards from them, but it was censored. So you had to write that everything is fine, you're having a ball. But basically, it was camp. It was still, you still couldn't run away. You had, instead of stripes, you had the Star of David cut out on your clothing, your own clothing, and sometimes they would give you they would shave your head completely, and then, cut your hair off, and then shave your head in the middle, so you couldn't, when somebody took your head off, somebody would know you right away you're a prisoner from concentration camp. Anyway, they were there for about 2 years, and by that time, 1942, they told us to get out of our house. 1941, and they took us to I call it a ghetto. I always try to explain that ghetto is not a big deal. You can build a ghetto in any part of this country. If you go to an Irish section and you say all of a sudden you're going to go after the Irish, I'll give you an example. They say, okay, anybody not Irish, go to this side. Everybody Irish, go this side. And of course they check out if it's true. You're Jewish, go this side. You're not, go this side. And they said, from now on, just bring all your furniture out, leave it outside, take your possessions, whatever you want. By that time, all the rings, or if you had earrings, everything was already gone. By that time, it was taken away from you. I can't spend any time how it was done, but basically that was, you had nothing. And we walked practically to our ghetto. It's like saying in Cambridge, they tell you you're going to go from Cambridge to Brighton, walking, or maybe 2 or 3 miles. They emptied about 3 or 4 houses which used to belong to non-Jews. They gave them better homes, and they pushed in all of the Jews. In a place like this here, let's say, of this, could have been 8, 9 families. We slept on top of each other because by that time my father was already in camp, my brothers were in camp, just women and young children. I'm still young, so I was still there. And it was called Pastelniak, which was about, like I said, they emptied a few farmhouses. And in that particular house, we were 5 families in one little house. And no food practically. I worked, and they took you to work every morning. You had to go to roll call, even though I was only 14 years old at the time, or 14 to 15. You stayed on roll call and you went to work, and on the way back you went with the Germans. They made sure that you come back and you don't go anywhere. And I worked in a tannery, cleaning blood on the floor and all that, and I slept, me and a friend of mine, in an attic on straw. We didn't even have a mattress. No food. I'm going to go further because there's so much more to say about that. Not much further. Now down the line we had what they call the selection. Most of them heard about the selection. It was very simple. One morning they called everybody in that ghetto out. By that time my father, 3 brothers were already in a concentration camp. I myself was only at that time 14, and then I stayed there for about a year. And my sister was 2 years younger, one of them was older. We lined up in the morning and they say, they look at me, and my mother said to me, and can you imagine a mother saying to a son, go back to the room, put on long pants. I said, why? It's June, it's May, it's beautiful. I mean, we didn't have that much clothes anyway. So she said, because you look older, and tell him you're 16, not 15. Because if you're 15, you went to Auschwitz and you never see your light again. If you're 16, you go to concentration camp. That was heaven. Go to concentration camp. I stood there. I had a sister. She was about the same height as I was, even though she was 2 years younger. Beautiful girl, blonde hair, but she was so naive and honest. We tried to tell her a lie. They look at you like at a horse, you know what I mean? I didn't say that to her. My mother said, I tell him you're 16. Maybe I don't have time, but look big enough to do some work. They use you. By that time, they needed help because they're starting to lose some stuff, you know, some of the Russia went into war and all that stuff. So she didn't, and she wound up with my mother and 2 of my little brothers and another little sister. All of them, I never saw them again. They went to Auschwitz, and that was the end of that. In the concentration camps, I was the first, so I went to the right, and I went to concentration camp. To one camp, right, not only 20 kilometers from my house, in Poland, on the German border. I worked in a factory where you do, what do you call that stuff that you put on the field to grow better? Fertilizer. They didn't give us a mask. I was completely black and dirt, and I got swollen from that stuff. They didn't give us equipment, they didn't care. And many Germans worked with us, but of course they had gloves, they had masks, they got paid. But if you ask them, if you find anybody my age that's been there, they say, I never knew, I never saw it. There weren't any. Everybody denies it. It never happened. And that's what goes on in this country now. It keeps over and over again. If you pay enough money to advertise it and say it never happened, they may just believe it, because that's all there is to it. And I'm talking to you all that be very careful. An enemy takes over a country, this is what they do: divide and conquer. And they try to use the bottom of the barrel, people that were poor or uneducated, and they tell them, we're going to give you their money. You know what I mean? It's something like that. I'm just giving an example. I want to go on. I don't want to stick into answer because there's so much to say. I sometimes spoke about 15 minutes. I'll let you tell. Okay. So anyway, one concentration camp. The first one was right in Poland. I was there for about 2 months. The second, out of that, in that camp, many of them died because they went to bed the same time I did, but for some reason that stuff bothered them, and they woke up twice the size as far as weight. They were completely swollen. Their heads were like unbelievable, the stomach. So many of them were just shot to death because they didn't bother with them. And many of them just said, well, maybe we can save him still, and maybe he lived, maybe he didn't. I had my own problems. I don't know what else happened to them. For about 2 months, and the next time, after that, they needed people somewhere else. So people say a concentration camp. It's any little country, any little town can become a concentration camp in no time. That's all you have to do. And you tell the rest of the civilians, do not go there. Forbidden, for what in German. It's forbidden to go there. And so you don't see them. But they saw me walking down the street every day with German shepherds. And one of the German shepherds, my brother, was taller, stronger than I was, but he could not take the hunger like I did for some reason. I was just lucky. I'm no hero. I was just lucky in that. There's many things I could tell how I survived, but it's many more hours to talk about. So my brother David, he saw some kind of a piece of grass that it's edible. He jumped out of line, and we walked with German shepherds, and the Germans were on horses. We walked like 10 kilometers every day to work. And the German shepherd jumped him and bit him right away. And of course, in the two Germans with the whips, instead of beating the dog if they had to, they beat him so hard, and he still had to do a day's work. He somehow survived. A few camps later, about 3 more camps later, I was in a camp where they gave me the stripes, because we had no stripes because they had to make. But what they did, they managed to put paint on your clothing or shave you. First they watched you couldn't run away. And you didn't know who to trust after you run away. They're not going to sell you for a piece of bread, so war is starvation. You'd be surprised what you can turn into after a while. So, what was I saying? Yeah, I went to another camp, and I worked on gravel. I remember that I'm surprised that I survived. It was the middle of the winter, must have been 1942 already, and I was on top of a pile of gravel, so tall. They pushed me up there, and I was supposed to push the gravel down, make it even, whatever. I don't remember. The wind was unbelievable. If somebody would say, I want to shoot you, I would have said, go ahead, because it was cold. I had no clothes. By that time, I already had the pajama stripes, the stripes. And I remember that I said, but if I fall down, I'm dead because it's so high up. I made it for some reason. Then I went to the next camp. I'm going to say it was called Fünf Teichen. And these were not fake, there were 2,000 camps in Germany. People think it's just Auschwitz, Mauthausen, and so forth. I lived, my mother's family was a very prominent family in Auschwitz, was called in Poland, Auschwitz. And they were very well to do, they lived there. And so they think Auschwitz is some kind of a killing city. It was a beautiful city, which turned out to be their place. And I also want to say, it's just a remark, that the reason Germany was attacking Poland first, because it was a fertile ground for them to do to the Jews whatever they want to do. They knew they would get more collaboration from them than from people in Belgium or other countries. I heard a story in, I don't know, was in Morocco or something, that when the Nazis came in, he said to the mayor of the city or whatever, he said, or the governor, he said, give me all your Jews. And if you don't, he said, we don't have any Jews. We only have Moroccans. And they walked away because they didn't want to fight it at that time. It just goes to show, with a little resistant, things would have been different. My fifth camp, I want to tell you this one here. How much time do we have? 10 minutes. My fifth camp was Fünf Teichen. There was, I never forget it because in that camp, I was so weak already that I must have weighed about 70 pounds, I don't know. And my brothers were with me in that camp. For some reason, they used to, I lost them for a while, and then they brought it back to our camp. And I was with them. And they were much stronger than I was. I was so weak. And they said, okay, there's a selection, stand up. By that time, we knew there were freight trains away nearby, and they said, everybody, they put me to the left side, which means dead, and to the right, and to the left. My two brothers were left behind in the camp. They told me, stay to the right. I got on the train, I couldn't even get up because I was so weak, and skin and bones. And they cried, and they never told anybody where they're sending me. As far as my brothers were concerned, although they didn't survive, and I did, they knew that I was going to Auschwitz or to be disposed of. I found out, and from that camp I went to another camp, and they gave me because the Russian front was already pushing, and they're having trouble. They're trying to get all the labor they could get. And the only thing I could still do is sitting down and doing something easy. So I was pushing powder into bullets, and those were going to kill Americans or Russians or whatever. That was my job. So I started to gain a little weight, and I was a little stronger, and from there they put me into another camp, which I worked as a riveter on tanks. Also, because the Germans were already losing the war, sort of, which I didn't know, but we didn't have any information. And so as a riveter I was using some kind of a thing to push nails it up, screws in, whatever. And the last camp was called Gourlitz. That's where I survived. Although because by that time the Russians kept pushing the Germans out, back all the time. So they didn't want to lose us, so they took us with them, back and forth. So the Russian front came forward to take over our camp. They took us into the countryside, and if they pushed him back, and they did push him back, but in the meantime, In that camp there were 6,000 Jews, Gaulites, on the border of Germany. It was Germany on the border of Poland. They pushed me up there, and anyway, so in that camp I went on a death march, and in that march, by that time, in that camp I had how I survived that camp was very unusual. I didn't know how to commit suicide. I could have run to the gate and be electrocuted or something, but he said, well, what if my father lives in this and that? Okay, yeah. I thought my wife was going to tell me to. But she doesn't. She doesn't tell me what to do in the house. Anyway, I get professional. So anyways, in that camp, I nothing to do. So one day I was looking out the window and I found that the kitchen where they cook potatoes for dinner is not too far from my barrack. So I had an idea, and I went to the infirmary and I said, I'm sick. And the guy, the Hungarian Jew, but he doesn't speak German or Polish or Yiddish. I couldn't communicate, but he knew what I was doing. He says, they're going to catch you. So I took the thermometer and put it here, like a hand thermometer, and I kept rubbing it until I got the amount that I need to stay home. So I stayed home. Why did I do that? They could have shot me. But I had an idea because I saw the guy that was in charge of the camp was a German killer, and he was in charge. But he was crazy. He killed his own mother before the war. That's what they told me. And he spoke German, and I spoke German very well too. So I said to myself, what I got to lose? So I didn't go on the roll call, and I was missing. So he came looking for me. He didn't look for me, but he said, what are you doing? How come you're not on roll call? Go to work 10 miles down the road. I said to him, you told me to sweep the floor over here. I did. He looked at me. I did. Oh, okay. Hit me. He said, mach schnell. Work fast. Hurry up. And the next day, I did the same thing. Oh, you're the one who sweeps the floor. The reason I did that, not so much for that, I had an eye on the potatoes in that kitchen. So when they were sleeping before lunchtime, because they already prepared the lunch hour thing, potatoes, I got in there quietly and I put my hand right in the pot and stove potatoes. And I ate them. It's like penicillin to life. I started to gain weight, I got stronger, and this is how I survived the death march back and forth. Every time the Russian front came forward, they took us. And on the way, I want to tell you, this is very important. On the death march that I did go before I did what I did, we were sleeping in a barn with the permission of the farmer, or not the permission. It was winter anyway, the winter of 1945. And by the way, people say Auschwitz. In Auschwitz they were already liberated, but we still suffered. So we had 6,000 Jews. They took us all out, and we slept in a barn. And on the barn, there's no room, so we slept on top of each other. My head on your stomach, your head on somebody else's stomach. When I woke up, when I woke up in the morning, I was going to wake the guy up to go to work because we got to go. He was dead because he was weak, just like I was in a way. But somehow I was stronger because I had these potatoes before, and he did not. He was weak, and so people say, "What did you do?" I said, "Well, you wouldn't believe it. What I did, I checked him out, and I took his shoes, and because I needed shoes, I didn't have shoes. My shoes were completely ripped." They said, "Oh, you did?" I said, "Well, anyway." And I was liberated the last day of the war, the 8th of May. It angers me so much because so many people, my two brothers, I found out after the war that they were still alive in April of 1945, and they shot 15,000 inmates, people, kids at that time, and my brothers must have been in between, because when I looked for them, I went back to Poland, and I found out before that you don't look for them because they're definitely among those that got killed. So therefore, I only had one brother and one sister left, and she was living here. She was like a mother to me, and I lived together with her because we helped each other out. I got a job, but it wasn't enough, So I lived with her until I got married. But the point is that she was so sick. When she came home, when I came in Poland, when I met her, when I found her in Poland, her teeth were completely taken out because she had gold teeth or silver teeth. The German took it out. She said, "You don't need any teeth." So I couldn't recognize her. She didn't work in this country at all. She just stayed home and cooked whatever. And she had, 2 kids in this country, and she passed away about 8 years ago. And now I have a wife, and I'm a grandfather. I've got 3 grandchildren in Washington, D.C. You met my daughter, Nadine. And she is, I used to be a Hasidic Jew when I was a kid because of the words of my father, of my parents. And my daughter, I sent her to just a Jewish camp, and she caught on to it, and she's what they call a modern Orthodox. So when she comes to my house, she drives me crazy. She goes, "Don't touch this and don't touch that." I'm going to go to a hotel. By the way, I want to thank you very much. I enjoyed the string orchestra. Unbelievable.
My mother, Bluma, a Holocaust survivor, was from Vilna, a center of Jewish culture and tradition. And here is a song about Vilna, as it is remembered in exile. Let it stand for all the places the world's 60 million refugees have been forced to flee. Vilna, city of spirit and innocence, where quiet prayers murmur soft secrets of the night. I often see you in the old Vilna ghetto, and my dreams in a foggy glow. Vilna sewed the first thread in our flag of freedom and inspired its children with a gentle spirit.
Oh Most of the children of the Vilna Ghetto were murdered, but their voices live on in the hymn of their ghetto youth club, Jugendhymnen. Our song is full of sorrow, but brave is our cheerful step. Though the enemy guards the gate, youth storms forth with their song. Young is everyone who wants to be. Years have no meaning. The old can be children too, in a new, free time.
Jugendgate for us, 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 Jugendgate for us. Unser Lied ist voll mit Treue, Christ ist unser Untergang. Huschte Säule wacht beim Teuer, stürmt Jugend mit Gesang. Jung ist jeder ist jung noch, Jord Hoffen kein Partei. Alte kennen Kinder, von einer neue freie Zeit. Jugend geht vor uns, 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 wenn geht vor uns. Wer es Volk läuft weg, wer mit Festheit stellt sein Fuß, bringt die Jugend sehr und kennen, vor dem Ghetto an der Hus. Jung ist jeder es will nur, Jorden haben kein Partei. Alte kennen Kinder, von einer neuen freie Zeit. Wir gedenken alle Sonnen, wir bewohnen alle frei. Ewig werden wir verbinden, unsere Gedanken mit dem Wein. Jung ist jeder es will nur, Jorden haben kein Partei. Alte kennen Kinder, von der Neue, von der Neue, von der Freie Zeit.
In memory of all the victims and refugees of the Holocaust and all the victims and refugees of more recent wars, we sing Schnirre Herre in fervent hope for a better world. Strings of pearls, golden flags, Messiah holds a goblet in his right hand and makes a blessing over the whole land. Messiah will come this year. Amen.
Halt
Home by Varsity Shear. No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well, and your neighbors running faster than you. You only leave home when home won't let you stay. No one leaves home unless home chases you, fire under your feet. It's not something you ever thought of doing until the blade burned threads into your neck. And even then, you carried the anthem under your breath. Only tearing up your password in an airport toilet, sobbing as each mouthful of paper made it clear that you wouldn't be going back. You have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. No one burns their palms under trains, beneath carriages. No one spends days and nights in the stomach of a truck, feeding on newspaper, unless the miles traveled mean something more than journey. No one crawls on their fences. No one wants to be beaten, pitied. No one chooses refugee camps or strip searches where your body is left aching, or prison, because prison is safer than a city of fire. The go-home blacks, refugees, asylum seekers, sucking our country dry, messed up their country, and now they want to mess ours up. How do the words, the dirty looks, roll off your backs? Maybe because the blow is softer than a limb torn off. Or the insults are easier to swallow than rubble, than bone, than your child's body. I want to go home, but home is the mouth of a shark. Home is the barrel of the gun. And no one would leave home unless home chased you to the shore. Unless home told you to quicken your legs, leave your clothes behind, crawl through the desert, wade through the oceans, drown, save, be hungry, beg, forget pride. Your survival is more important. No one leaves home until home is a sweaty voice in your ear saying, leave. Run away from me now. I don't know what I've become, but I know that anywhere is safer than here.
The annual Cambridge Holocaust Commemoration is inspired by our shared desire to remember the victims of the Holocaust, while simultaneously allowing this experience to inform the way in which we deal with bigotry, prejudice, and demonization. Not only for those communities targeted in the Holocaust, but for all people, wherever and whoever they are. We've chosen the poem Beshert, written by Irina Klepfish, to be read by a variety of voices from our community. Beshert means something like destiny in Yiddish, and expresses the randomness that led to death or to survival within the context of systematic, deliberate genocide and persecution by the Nazi regime. While Klepfish's poem reflects the profound and personal impact the Holocaust had on her, it also expresses ideas that speak to us all, and that remind us how we are all inextricably connected to one another. Beshert also invites us to remember all of the other communities who have faced repression, persecution, and genocide in the past, and those who continue to face it today. By recognizing that sorrow, loss, and persecution, we also lift up our commitment to confronting intolerance and inhumanity wherever it exists. Moreover, we honor the spirit of resistance and resilience they embody. This is a responsive reading, and we ask you to join us in saying, "These words are dedicated to all those who died," which can be found starting on page 8 of your program. Beshert. These words are dedicated to those who died. These words are dedicated to those who died.
Because they had no love and felt alone in the world. Because they were afraid to be alone and tried to stick it out.
Because they could not ask. Because they were shunned.
Because they were sick and their bodies did not listen. Because they played it safe. Because they had no connections. Because they had no faith. Because they felt they did not belong and wanted to die.
These words are dedicated to those who died.
Because they were loners and lighted, because they acquired friends and brothers to them.
Because they took risks, because they were stubborn and refused to give up, because they asked for too much.
These words are dedicated to those who died. Because a card was lost and a number was skipped, because a bed was denied, because a place was filled and no other place was left. These words are dedicated to those who died.
Because someone did not follow through. Because someone was overworked and forgot.
Because someone left everything to God.
Because someone was late. Because someone did not arrive at all. Because someone told them to wait and they just couldn't any longer.
These words are dedicated to those who died.
Because death is a punishment.
Because death is a reward.
Because death is the final rest.
Because death is eternal rage. These words are dedicated to those who died. These words are dedicated to those who survived.
Because their second grade teacher gave them books. Because they did not draw attention to themselves and got lost in the shuffle.
Because they knew someone who knew someone else who could help them and bumped into them on a corner on a Thursday afternoon.
Because they played it safe, because they were lucky.
These words are dedicated to those who survived.
Because they knew how to cut corners, because they drew attention to themselves and always got picked.
Because they took risks, because they had no principles and were hard.
These words are dedicated to those who survived. Because they refused to give up and defied statistics. Because they had faith and trusted in God. Because they expected the worst and were always prepared.
Because they were angry. Because they could ask. Because they mooched off others and saved their strength.
Because they turned their other cheek.
Because they look the other way.
These words are dedicated to those who survived.
Because life is a wilderness and they were savage.
Because life is an awakening, and they were alert.
Because life is a flowering and they blossom.
Because life is a struggle and they struggle.
Because life is a gift and they were free to accept it.
These words are dedicated to those who survived,
were shared.
It is traditional at Holocaust commemorations to light 6 candles representing the 6 million Jews who were systematically murdered, including 1.5 million children. In our ceremony, we also remember the other groups that were targeted by the Nazis, the Roma, who were singled out for genocide, and the gay men and lesbians, people with disabilities, and resistors who were persecuted and murdered. We light the first candle to remember the voices of the Jewish community. We light the second candle to remember the voices of the Romani community. We light the third candle to remember the voices of those persecuted for their sexual orientation or gender identity. We light the fourth candle to remember the voices of people with disabilities. We light the fifth candle to remember the voices of those who resisted the Nazi regime and its policies. And we light the sixth candle to remind us never to forget.
Lead